Hello everyone, my name is Gary O'Mealy, and in this video we are going to discuss and introduce concepts associated with metabolism. Metabolism is just a very broad term that refers to all of the chemical reactions happening inside the cells of an organism at any given time. These chemical reactions can do a lot of different things that are going to contribute to overall physiological activity, maintaining homeostasis, and these things can deal with energy, the production and consumption of energy. They can involve constructing materials like protein and DNA, deconstructing those materials, breaking them down into their constituent components. They can involve regulating the contents and composition of body fluids like we've talked about before, and even detoxify compounds that are found in the body, in addition to other things that I'm probably just not thinking of right now. As far as metabolic reactions go, and keep in mind there are thousands of different chemical reactions happening inside the cell at any given time, we can generalize and break down these reactions into two different types: catabolic reactions and anabolic reactions. Catabolic reactions involve the breakdown of large, very complex molecules into much smaller, much simpler components. A couple of prominent examples of this include the digestion of the food that we eat. The food molecules we eat, lipids, carbohydrates, and proteins, tend to be very large and very complex, so large and so complex that we would not be able to absorb them into our bloodstream across the wall of the intestinal lining until we break them down into something smaller that can actually get through. Another good example of this, to take it a step further, is what we saw before with cellular respiration. Even after food molecules have been broken down into smaller molecules like glucose, the reactions of cellular respiration break these molecules down even further as a means of extracting and harvesting the energy out of them. To give you the idea here, a catabolic reaction will involve the breaking of the chemical bonds that hold a large complex molecule together. You can see this illustrated here, where this large molecule is formed by the chemical bonds that join these smaller subunits together. A catabolic reaction would break these chemical bonds, thus freeing up the individual components to then become and act as their own individual units. The important thing to understand here is that chemical bonds store energy, and the breaking of these bonds is going to release that energy. Now, how the cell deals with that energy is going to depend a little bit. That energy can be put to use directly, it could be transferred and stored as ATP, or it could be saved for later in some other form or fashion. This will be something that we talk about in a future video, how the cell deals with energy in this manner. As for anabolic reactions, these are pretty much the exact opposite of what we just saw with catabolic reactions. These are going to involve the synthesis of large, complex molecules from much smaller, much more simple components. Some prominent examples of this include protein synthesis, the building of very large proteins from much smaller amino acid subunits, and then DNA replication, the forming of new DNA molecules from a pre-existing template. Now, if you remember your general biology, you'll of course understand that both of these processes are extremely important, both of which of course occur during the cell cycle. Protein synthesis, of course, occurring in other situations as well. If we use the same sort of illustration for anabolic reactions, it's going to be very similar to what we saw with catabolic reactions, just run in reverse. And we can think about the energy part of this in very much the same way. Anabolic reactions are going to involve the forging of new chemical bonds rather than the breaking of pre-existing ones. So what we're going to do here is we're going to take small individually existing subunits and cause them to come together by forming chemical bonds between them. So instead of having 6 individual molecules, now it's just one very big, very complex molecule. An anabolic reaction will do this sort of thing. But we also need to consider the energy that's involved. Since chemical bonds store energy, as we said before, we have to input that energy into the system, and that energy will then be stored in these new chemical bonds. So we can think of this as being an energy loss that has to be incurred by the cell in order to do this. It's sort of like paying money to get something done. So when you are thinking about in the future these different types of metabolic reactions, I suggest that you think about them in terms of the energy that's involved. So for catabolic reactions, you can think about a large complex molecule starting at a high energy state and then moving downhill towards a low energy state. The difference in energy as you go from high to low energy is going to be in large part harvested by the cell. As for anabolic reactions, your initial molecules are going to start in a low energy state, so to push them up towards a high energy state, you're going to have to provide them with that energy. So the cell is going to have to sacrifice some energy in order to get something done like that. So for anabolic reactions like synthesizing proteins or replicating DNA, those are costly activities and the cell will have to sacrifice energy, usually in the form of ATP, in order to get those things done. All right, that's going to pretty much do it for this video. Here are some vocabulary terms I think you ought to be aware of after this video. And as for checking your understanding, the questions I have for you are: what sorts of things can be accomplished with chemical reactions in the cells of the body? And how are catabolic reactions and anabolic reactions different with respect to reactants, products, and energy? Okay, that's going to wrap up this video. If you have any questions, go ahead and leave them in the comments section, and I will see you for the next video. So long.